Good afternoon. George Cavaligos for HFT Bonds. Bonds got smoked last night. Looks like the Bank of England is going to cut back on some of their support for the mortgage market, and I think we saw some big block trade selling in the bonds, in the notes actually, not in the bonds, in the T-notes last night. Remember, T-notes correlate with mortgages a lot better than bonds do. That started to sell off. By the time we got in this morning, the markets had already gotten hit really hard. Started rallying actually into the ISM data and was on its sort of mid-morning or early morning highs when the ISM data hit. Again, a lot stronger than expected. Markets went and made new lows. 10-year got down. March 10-year got down to 124.23 and a half. Bonds got down to 129.20. We're getting real close to the bull, sort of the make or break bull case support trend lines down there. I highlighted some levels here. In the DEES 10-year, it's 125.28 plus. The March 10-year, it's 124.19 plus. The March bond, it's 129.11, and the DEES bond, it's 130.27. Those are kind of key support levels. You start breaking those levels, and you got to look for some pretty impulsive type selling, I think, at that point. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that. The markets tried to bounce a couple times today, never really were able to get back and not only fill the gaps from the opening, the March bond actually did fill the gap from the opening back up towards that 07-08 level and then closed near the lows. 10-years didn't quite get back to the gap on the bounce earlier this morning. They left a small gap up there on the day session only charts between like 04 and 06-ish, I want to say. And then, the number hit and we really never recovered off of those lows and closed near the lows. Now, it gets tricky. We got a lot of data tonight. We also have a double Fed buyback tomorrow and big buybacks on Thursday and Friday, too. And it looks like a lot of Fed buying this week. I think I added up the totals. It's over $15 billion this week estimated for various sectors of the curve. The thing is, some of these taper ideas are rolling around again. Whether they taper or not, and how they manipulate that idea, they need to get the money out of the excess reserves position. Whatever the Fed's buying just seems to end up right back at the Fed with these banks' excess reserve deposits. It's not breaking out into the economy at large. It seems like it's sort of a closed loop in amongst the Fed and the banks. It's good for the banks, especially with the curve this steep. So look for a test of those levels that I highlighted, those trend lines. We'll see what happens from there. It should be pretty interesting couple days ahead of us here. The Fed had a problem with their T-bill auctions today. I have never heard of that before. They actually postponed the T-bill auction until tomorrow. So I thought maybe at that point the market would bounce a little bit because of the lack of supply of bills and that money getting churned back into cash at least for a day. Probably be sitting in the repo market or whatever at least for a day until we see what happens with the T-bill auction tomorrow. So that's about it. Watch the data. The ISM stuff has all been stronger than expected. We get some more ISM data tonight. The other big thing this week are all these central bank announcements. I think the Royal Bank of Australia has a statement tonight. Wednesday, I think, is the Bank of Canada. Thursday is the Bank of England and the ECB. A lot of good stuff going on there, especially with the ECB. A lot of talk about negative rates there, weaker than expected inflation numbers, and their great concern of deflation at this point. So, the euro's holding up pretty well considering they're talking about negative deposit rates, but we'll see. The dollar was pretty strong today. That's been kind of a sell signal for the stock market and a buy signal for the bonds. It didn't work well for the bonds, obviously, today. And it worked okay for the S&Ps. They closed lower, and I guess the Russell was down more than 1%. Last time I looked, it was down like 1.2%, and that's been really the big leader. So keep an eye on that Russell, the old TF. Okay, guys, that's about it. I'll see you tomorrow morning in the morning email and in the chat room. Have a great night.